It was a warm Friday evening. The sun had gone down, but the air still felt nice. Not too hot, not too cold. Just the kind of night where people like to dress up, go out, and feel fancy. At the big, shiny doors of a restaurant called La Fontaine, something special was happening. Inside, the soft sound of a jazz piano played sweet music. The piano notes floated through the air like tiny bubbles. Glasses clinked together. People whispered while they ate expensive dinners. Everything felt calm, soft, and golden. The restaurant was very fancy. The lights were golden and warm, making everyone look like they belonged in a movie. The women wore sparkly dresses and shiny jewelry. The men wore suits with ties and shiny shoes that clicked when they walked. The food here was super fancy too. Some steaks cost $500. People here didn't like surprises. They liked everything to be just right. So when the doors opened again and a man walked in wearing a black hoodie, old jeans, and scuffed up sneakers, no one really looked at him. He didn't look like the usual kind of guest. He didn't wear anything shiny. He didn't smell like cologne. He didn't even look nervous. The hostess, the lady who stood at the front desk, looked up at him. Then she quickly looked away. She didn't think he belonged. But the man didn't stop or explain. He just walked up to her and said, "Reservation for Carter." His voice was calm. Not loud, not shy. Just clear and steady. The hostess blinked. That name was on her list, but she didn't expect it to belong to him. "Table for one?" she asked, smiling politely even though she was confused. The man nodded. There was something about him, something quiet, strong, and still. He didn't look rich. He didn't look famous. He didn't look like anything at all. He was almost invisible in a room full of shiny people. The hostess walked him through the restaurant. They passed tables with men in shiny jackets and women who laughed in tiny giggles. She led him to a small table in the back near the restrooms. It wasn't a nice spot, but she didn't know what else to do. The man didn't complain. He just sat down, took off his hoodie, and placed it gently over the back of his chair. That's when the soft light above hit his face. If someone had been really paying attention, they might have gasped. They might have shouted, "Oh my gosh, it's him." But no one did. Because the lights were low, the wine was strong, and the people were too busy talking about themselves. No one noticed that the man in the hoodie was Will Smith. Yes, Will Smith. The rapper. The actor. The man who won Grammys and made everyone laugh and cry in movies. He was famous all over the world. But tonight he wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't smiling for the cameras. He wasn't trying to be a star. Tonight he was just a man who wanted to eat in peace. Across the room, sitting near a window, another man was eating alone too. He had a black shirt and dark pants. His beard was a little gray, and his eyes were quiet but sharp. He held a glass of sparkling water and watched everything. He knew who had just walked in. He knew it was Will Smith. But he didn't say anything. He didn't wave or ask for a photo. That man was Keanu Reeves. And like Will, he was here for quiet. But quiet doesn't last long in a place full of loud people. Especially not when someone like Richard Grayson was about to walk in. The doors opened again, but this time it was noisy. You could almost feel the wind change. Richard Grayson walked in like he owned the whole city. He wore a bright white suit that sparkled like snow under the lights. His hair was slicked back. His smile was big and fake. He didn't walk. He floated like the floor just carried him. Two younger men followed him. They wore matching suits and tried to act like him. A beautiful woman followed too. She was very quiet, very still, and looked very bored. The maitre d', the head waiter, stood up straighter when he saw Richard. Like he had to be taller just because Richard had walked in. "Mr. Grayson, your table is ready," the waiter said. "Of course it is," Richard said, not even stopping to look around. He didn't check the reservation. He didn't say thank you. Richard Grayson believed he was the reservation. As he walked to his table in the very center of the room, he passed Will Smith. But he didn't see Will. He just saw the hoodie. He saw the dark skin. He saw a table by the restroom. And his brain told him, this person isn't important. Across the room, Keanu Reeves saw it happen. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. But he stopped holding his glass. He just watched. Richard sat down, ordered a $400 bottle of wine like it was no big deal, and started talking loudly. "You know what's wrong with art these days?" he said. "No soul. It's all fake." The people at his table laughed like they were supposed to. Will didn't look at him. He took a sip of water and looked at the table. He had heard this kind of talk before. He had lived it. But Richard wasn't done. He pointed to the jazz piano player in the corner. "Even that's dying," he said. "Live music is a luxury now. All we get is noise. Rap, TikTok, just silly sounds." People laughed again. But some of them weren't sure if they were supposed to. Will looked down at his napkin. It was folded neatly in his lap. He didn't move. But Keanu Reeves did. He set down his glass slowly. He leaned forward just a little. He had seen moments like this before. Rooms where rich people tried to be mean just because they could. He didn't jump in. Not yet. Because real strength isn't loud. Real strength waits. Richard was still getting louder. You know what would be funny? He said with a sparkle in his eye. A mean sparkle. If one of these new street rappers gave us a show right now. He looked around. Then he spotted Will. And everything in the room changed. A fork hit a plate. The sound echoed and then everything went quiet. Richard had found his next target. He stood up a little and spun his wine glass for show. Then he raised his voice. Hey you there, he said pointing to Will. Yeah, we were just talking about poetry. You wouldn't happen to be a rapper, would you? Will looked up slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes were deep and unreadable. He didn't say anything. Richard smiled. A big fake show-off smile. Come on, don't be shy. You've got the hoodie, the mystery. You must have some bars in you. Some people in the room laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. I was nervous. Will looked straight at Richard and said quietly, I'm just here for dinner. But Richard didn't want dinner. He wanted attention. He stood up fully and tapped his glass with a knife. The jazz player stopped playing. The room held its breath. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard shouted, we've got a special guest performer tonight. Everyone turned to look. Some gasped. Some whispered. Let's see if he's more than just an attitude. Richard added. Come on, man. One verse. A little something. Make our wine worth it. Will didn't move. But under the table, his hands were clenched into fists. From across the room, Keanu Reeves slowly put down his silverware. He hadn't stood up. Not yet. Because sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who waits. The one who watches. The one who listens. And he was listening now. The waiter walked up to Will slowly. He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure if he should say something. He whispered, Sir, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. But Will stood up anyway, not because he wanted to but because he remembered something his grandma told him after people booed him at his first school talent show. She said, sometimes they don't see you until you make them listen. Will walked to the middle of the room. The light from the big chandelier above him was very bright. He pulled back his hood. The room went very quiet. Some people squinted to see better. Some opened their eyes wide. A few people grabbed their phones to take videos. But Richard didn't care. He was smiling, thinking he had already won. Keanu Reeves leaned forward in his seat. This wasn't just a show. This was going to be a moment everyone would remember. A message popped up. Are you still here? Drop a number 3 in the comments to let us know. Will stood still, hands in his pockets. The soft jazz music had stopped. Now there was only silence. Everyone was staring at him. Some people were curious. Some were excited. A few looked embarrassed for him. But no one looked more proud than Richard Grayson. Richard lifted his wine glass like it was a microphone and said, Come on now. Show us what all the fuss is about, or was the Grammy Awards just a gift bag? Some people laughed. Will's jaw tightened. This wasn't new for him. People had misunderstood him, laughed at him, and looked down on him many times before. But this time felt different. It wasn't just about him anymore. It felt like the whole room wanted to see him mess up, like they were waiting for him to fail. Richard walked closer, now only a few steps away. He said, Let's make this fun. He pulled out a gold money clip and put 5 $100 bills on a tray. Say a little rhyme and this money is yours. Will didn't even look at the money. Instead, he looked past Richard, straight at Keanu Reeves. Their eyes met for a moment. Keanu gave a small nod, not a nod that said, do it, but one that said, do it your way. Will turned back to Richard and said quietly, You think this is a game? You think just because you're in a fancy room with rich people and nice tablecloths, you can't be touched? Richard raised his eyebrow, looking amused. But Will wasn't done. I came here to eat, Will said. But now you want a show. He walked into the center of the room between the tables, right under the shiny chandelier. He took a spoon from a table and tapped it once on a glass, listening to the sound. Then he said, I'm not going to take your money. He looked straight into Richard's eyes. I'm going to take your story. Then he began to rap. There was no music, no microphone, just his voice. His words came out clear and strong, like they were made of fire and truth. You want me to dance, to make you feel right, to forget who I am, so you don't see your fright. But I've been a king, even before I had gold. My story's not bought. It's alive. It's true. The room didn't move. People turned their chairs to see better. Phones came up slowly to record. The piano player in the corner sat still, his mouth slightly open. You laugh at what scares you, what you'll never be, because it's not just paintings. It's the truth and it's me. Richard's smile faded like a candle going out. Will wasn't just rapping. He was telling the truth, about himself and about how people like Richard tried to make others feel small. Every word felt like it had waited a long time to be heard. But the strongest part? Keanu Reeves hadn't moved. He just sat there listening, watching. Because this wasn't his moment. Not yet. Will finished with one last line that landed like a rock in quiet water. I'm not your entertainment. I'm your reminder. That real power. Don't ask to be heard. Silence. No one clapped. No one laughed. No one said a word. The only sound was a wine glass shaking slightly in someone's hand. Everyone had stopped breathing. Richard stood still, his wine glass in one hand, the other hand hanging like he didn't know what to do with it. He didn't look proud anymore. He looked confused. Will didn't wait. He walked back to his table like nothing big had happened, like he had just cleared his throat, not like he had just broken everyone's expectations. Then a woman near the bar stood up and began to clap. Slowly. Once. Twice. Then faster. Louder. Another person joined in. Then another. In just a few seconds the whole room was clapping, loudly, wildly. It wasn't fake. It was real. It was the kind of clapping people do when they feel something deep inside. Will stayed seated. But then there was a different sound. A slow, steady clap from the corner of the room. Everyone turned. It was Keanu Reeves. He stood up while clapping. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't acting. He was just there, calm and strong and clearly moved. He walked toward Will's table while people kept clapping like waves crashing in the room. Richard, still nearby, looked at both Will and Keanu with a mix of worry and confusion. The two men looked completely different, one full of strength, the other unsure of himself now. Keanu stopped by Will's table and looked around. Then he said, "You came for a show and got a truth you didn't expect." He turned to Richard. "You made fun of a man whose art has touched the world, and you didn't even know who he was. That's not just rude. That's not knowing anything." Richard tried to say something but stopped. There was nothing left to say. The clapping slowly quieted, but the feeling in the room stayed strong. Everyone was still thinking about what they had just seen. For the first time in a long time, Will looked around and didn't see people feeling sorry for him or judging him. He saw people who respected him. And that, more than money, fame, or getting even, was what Will never thought he'd get in a room like this. Not by fighting. Not by bragging. But by using his voice. The clapping finally stopped. But the silence after was even louder. Then Keanu spoke again. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was soft but powerful. "You know what the saddest part is?" he said, turning to Richard, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You didn't see him because you weren't really looking. And even now, after everything, you still aren't listening." Richard stood stiff, trying to look confident again. But his smile was gone. His friends around him were quiet. Even the woman next to him looked at him differently, like she was seeing the real Richard for the first time. Keanu stepped closer. He wasn't angry. His voice was clear and honest. "You thought he was just a guy in a hoodie? Someone you could laugh at? Someone you could control? Someone you could embarrass?" Then he looked at Will and said, "But you didn't know you were facing a man with more power in his calm than you've ever shown in all your fancy speeches." The room was so quiet it was like it was holding its breath. Keanu turned all the way to face Richard. They were standing just a few feet apart. Two men. Two different lives. Looking right at each other. "You think having a lot of money makes you powerful," Keanu said. "But real power is quiet. It wears hoodies. It eats by itself. And when it talks, everyone listens." Richard opened his mouth to talk, but Keanu raised his hand. "No. Not tonight," he said. "Tonight, you listen." His words felt like a judge's hammer in a courtroom. Richard slowly sat down. He didn't look like a big, important man anymore. He looked like someone who had just seen himself in a mirror. And he didn't like what he saw. Other people in the restaurant moved in their seats. Some whispered. Some stayed very quiet. But everyone understood one thing. Something had changed. This wasn't just a fancy dinner anymore. It had become something special. Something they would always remember. Not because of the food or the drinks. But because they saw that being honest is more important than being proud. Keanu turned back to Will. He gave him a small nod of respect and sat down like nothing happened. He didn't make a big show of it. He just told the truth. And truth doesn't need a stage to stand on. The room stayed quiet. But it was the kind of silence that made people think. Keanu was still standing. Not as a famous person. Not as a hero, just as someone who had been watching and thinking, and finally chose to speak. He didn't yell. He didn't look at Richard anymore. Instead, he looked around the room, at everyone else, because they were the ones who needed to hear this. A long time ago, Keanu began, something really sad happened to me. I lost someone I loved very much. And for a long time I couldn't do anything. I couldn't think. I couldn't feel anything. The room got even quieter. Some people knew what he was talking about. Most didn't. But they listened. Keanu kept going. The only thing that helped me feel better was music. Not fancy music. Not jazz or opera. But rap. Rap music was loud, honest, and full of feelings. It sounded like someone shouting into the dark, hoping someone would hear. He paused. One of those voices was Will's. Will looked surprised. Keanu gave a small smile. I used to sit in my little apartment in Toronto and play just the two of us again and again. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Now everyone was truly listening. Not because they were being polite, but because they were amazed. And tonight, Keanu said, you all watched a man stand up in a room that tried to make him small. But instead he made the room bigger. With his words. With his truth. Keanu pointed around the room. You don't have to like rap. You don't have to wear hoodies. But if your money, your table, your title makes you forget what real art looks like, art that comes from the heart, then maybe the problem isn't the art. Maybe it's the mirror. A few people clapped. First, soft and unsure. Then more people joined in. Then louder. But Keanu just nodded once. He turned to Will and said quietly, I owed you that one. Will's face didn't change much. Just a tiny smile at the corner of his mouth. The kind of thank you that doesn't need words. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be seen. No one moved for a while. The clapping stopped. But Keanu's words stayed in the air like the last note of a sad song. Richard sat stiff in his chair. He wasn't the important one anymore. His wine was still full. His money clips sat next to his empty plate. No one looked at him. Not even the friends he came with. The show was over. But the message had just started. Will stood up slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't look angry. He just looked calm. He fixed his hoodie and nodded at a woman sitting nearby. She whispered, thank you. Keanu stood up right after him. No big goodbye. No speech. He just put a hand on Will's shoulder, like a period at the end of a sentence. They walked to the door together. People moved out of the way. Not because Will and Keanu were famous, but because respect is heavy, and it makes people move. Even the restaurant host, who didn't notice Will when he walked in, now opened the door with a quiet bow. Will stopped before leaving. He looked back at Richard. Not in anger. Not even in pity. Just with clear eyes. Next time, Will said gently, don't confuse silence with absence. Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. Will walked outside. Keanu followed. The doors closed behind them with a soft click. But to the people inside, it felt like a door had slammed shut. Inside, people started talking again. But it was different now. No one talked about vacations or fancy drinks or money. They talked about what just happened. About that moment. That line. That silence. That song. Because that night, the truth had walked into a room full of rich people. And walked out taller than them all. Outside, the night air was cool and fresh. Will and Keanu stood on the sidewalk. The restaurant behind them was quiet now, like a scene in a movie after it ends. They didn't talk right away. They didn't have to. Will looked up at the sky. It was clear and full of stars. The kind of sky you notice only after leaving a place that tried to make you feel small. Keanu took something from his coat. It was a little notebook. He handed it to Will. On the front was a message written in pen. Truth doesn't need a stage. It just needs courage. Will smiled. A small, tired smile. Thanks, man, he said softly. Don't thank me, Keanu said. You stood up. I just stood beside you. They walked down the street together. Then their paths split. No big goodbye. No waves. Just two men walking their own way, carrying something strong and invisible between them. The next morning, the whole internet was talking about what happened. Someone had recorded everything. Richard's mean words. Will's reply. The clapping. Keanu's speech. The video got 4 million views in 12 hours. Hashtag started trending. Hashtag speak like Will. Keanu knew silence can be powerful. Articles were written. Podcasts talked about it. Art schools played Will's freestyle in class. Students made t-shirts with quotes. A youth center in Chicago renamed their open mic night the Will Smith Room. And through it all, Will didn't say anything online. No tweets. No interviews. No, I told you so. Instead, the next night, he sat at his old keyboard in his quiet little apartment and started writing again. Not for likes, not for payback, but for himself, for the kid he used to be, the one who thought wearing a hoodie made him invisible, for the artists who were told to sit down and be quiet, for the people who knew silence not as peace, but as a cage, because sometimes it only takes one voice to change a room, especially when that voice tells the truth. If you like this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.